This topic, viewing the pandemic as a global rite of passage, is actually one that that bubbled up for me almost at the very beginning of this whole thing. And in New York City, our first weekend of kind of official lockdown was March 14th, 15th. And within 2 weeks after that, I read a couple articles that just really kind of blew me away. In fact, I think my mom sent me the one about the stages of grief and how we are grieving and continue to 10 weeks later in this place that we're in right now. So the fact that we're in a period of time globally that's typically something, these stages of grief, and I will go on to say the stages of transition, which is kind of my area of passion and expertise. But the stages of grief we are now experiencing globally. For though I think just about everybody now is familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work. And there are now several, depending on what you look at, there are now several different models of the stages of grief. And I can never remember them all at the same time, but so I have my little crib notes here. Denial is the first one. Anger, bargaining. What's the next one? Depression, right? And then ultimately acceptance. And her co-author for her book, which was Death and Dying, and back in the, I think it was the 50s, David Kessler is still around. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is not. Added another one with permission from her family, which is meaning. So after you go through those 5 stages, then it's looking for meaning. So think about each one of them. I'm not going to dwell on the stages of grief because we're here to talk about this rite of passage, which is what this initiation, this global initiation that we're going through really right now. And the stages, the other model that I'm going to play with is the model that comes out of change psychology. I have the original book. It's got very different. I think it looks backward for you. I'm not sure if it does for you or not. That was created by Bill Bridges, and the name of the book is just Transitions: Managing Life's Changes. And one of the things that he did, he's kind of the granddaddy of modern change psychology. And the book originally came out, I think, in the mid 80s, and he's written several since then. But his thesis, similar to having the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with, his thesis is that we also move through, as we're moving through any kind of change in our life, whether it's a happy one, like getting married, or a sad one, someone dying. Hi, Kathy. Whatever the change is, there are very predictable stages that we move through, which is kind of comforting, because usually if you're in the middle of something, whether it is an actual death and, getting familiar with the predictable stages of grieving, or if it's a life change, then it's comforting to know that you're not crazy, that some of the feelings that you're having and the things that you're doing and the questions that you're asking and all that kind of stuff are normal. And I know when I work with clients who are in big transitions, they often just say, oh, it's such a relief to know that I'm not crazy. So the name of the book is Making Sense of Life Changes, but the major name is Transitions, the big thing across the top. William Bridges is his name, for those of you that want to look it up. Very short little book. And one of the things that he did is really emphasize that it doesn't matter whether it's a change that you've created, you've made the decision to change jobs, for instance, or whether it's something that's been done to you. And this is where we come into this place that we are now, this global initiation, this global rite of passage that we're in now. This is something that every person on the planet is experiencing right now. So what I think is helpful in times like this is to come back to these models. And even though it's certainly very unique that we're using this model in a global way, what I'd love to kind of, I am going to look a little bit more at the stages of grief, because I think if you've never read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, also another very thin book, timeless book, I think you'll find it very enlightening. But I will also afterwards, I don't want to do it now and distract myself, I will send the link to this terrific article that was in the Harvard Business Review, where they interviewed this David Keebler, who's the one that added meaning on to one of the other, to the end of the grief stages. And then I'll also, the other thing that I found, also within the first 2 weeks of our lockdown, was a wonderful article from, and this is what really got me thinking about this whole notion of viewing this pandemic as this huge initiation, much like shamans and elders and cultures all over the world have guided people through these rites of passages, these initiations. And the article was from a place called Heartland Sanctuary, and I'll put the link to that article so you can read that as well. One of the things that talks about is that any initiation has to, regardless of your culture, regardless of whether you've chosen it, I was going to say it's always a place to go deep, whether you've chosen it or whether whether it's been foisted upon you like this global pandemic, that the two elements of any initiation are intensity and transformation. So, I mean, could you find any better words to talk about this initiation that we're in the midst of? And like so many metaphors, like so many great things that have been written about initiation, they use the metaphor of the chrysalis, of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, and I love the imagery that they create, and talking about the caterpillar as it is spinning, building its chrysalis. Everything it goes in this massive feeding frenzy and devours everything, and it just becomes goo, except for these imaginal cells. Isn't that a great name? And the imaginal cells are what then, take life from all this goo and turn into butterflies. So we're in the goo place right now, right? Nobody knows what this is, what life is going to look like on the other side of this. We're still trying to figure out how to get through, whatever the next year is going to look like. So I will send the link to that article, Heartland Sanctuary. You could probably Google it, but I promise I'll put it in the chat later. So if we look at this notion of the three stages, and I'll give you a little bit, and then I'm going to lead you into a meditation where you can experience them personally, but in the perspective of this being a global shift, a global change that we're dealing with. So if you don't have paper, pencil, whatever, that might be good to have handy for when we get into the meditation, because I'll ask you some questions. I'll ask you the typical questions when I teach about the moving through life's big changes, and what are the stages of transition that Bill Bridges talks about in his book. I've renamed them because I don't like, I'll tell you what they are in a minute. One of his phrases I don't like a whole lot. But as I'll bring you into this meditation, and I'll ask you some of the questions that I ask people that are in my own workshops, typically about something personal to them, but we're all going through our own version of personal transformation, intense transformation. Remember, those are the two big words when we're talking about any kind of initiation, and then how that expands, what that looks like when the whole world is going through the same thing. So the three stages, Bill Bridges talks about endings, which is, when you're releasing, when you're letting things go, and then moving into what he calls the neutral zone, which frankly, I think is anything but neutral. And then when you move through that and out the other side, it's new beginnings. So I've renamed them. I talk about release, which is, letting go of what you've known, of retreat, and that's the place, that all of us are in now. Most of us are in forced lockdown and maybe slowly starting to emerge, and then rebirth, coming out the other side. So if you look at those, if you play with the imagery of what it means to go to your initiation cave or your initiation hut. This is what shamans and elders did when typically when people were having their, boys or girls were having their rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. And you'd contemplate things. I actually did this years ago. I had initiation huts for a group of young women that were part of my Unitarian church, that we did this whole wonderful outside rite of passage with them and invited them into initiation huts, separate little pup tents that were on a hill just slightly, not too far away, but away from the big tent that me and their mothers were also sleeping overnight. So we'll use that imagery, and I'll just say a little bit more about it. Typically, when we're moving through any of these transitions, they're very sort of predictable emotions and feelings that we go through. In the release stage, it's when we're kind of getting unstuck from the way things were. So think about what that means in your own life, what's changing in your own life, and then what's changing globally. Kind of keep both of those simultaneously if you can. And here's where, and we're going kind of from resistance to relief. So, I don't know that there's much relief yet, but we're certainly attempting to move through. Hey, Lou. We're definitely attempting to move through where we are, that initial terror and unknown. I mean, in some ways it's kind of settled in deeper, but so that's we move gently from resistance to relief. And then in the retreat place, which we are still at, and I should also say here too, that these are, I'm presenting them linearly, but they're actually, they're circular. I mean, you could be in release mode, letting go, surrendering, all those lovely things that we need to do when we're going through a big change, and then move into retreat. And retreat's a great time for self-care, and boy, I hope you've been doing that and hearing a lot about that with self-care. But then we can go back. We can start to reflect on, oh my gosh, what are all the things that I'm leaving behind? Do I want to be leaving them behind? So in this place of retreat, and we're now just like the butterfly, corny metaphor, but it's when you know about the imaginal cells and the frenzied consumerism, the frenzied consumption that the caterpillar goes through. Does that sound familiar on a global level? Isn't that amazing? So you have to read this Heartland Sanctuary article. I promise I'll put the link in here later. So as we begin to rebirth, as we begin to just, start to come out of this chrysalis that we're in, emerge from our homes, that's the rebirth stage. And at that point, things can be a little overwhelming. There's going to be a lot that we need to coordinate and figure out, and how is life going to be different, and how can we manage this with our families and with work, and all the stuff that we're starting to see glimmers of. Everything's going to be different. I mean, we thought things were different after 9/11. This is big time, because it is truly global, and we will definitely be in more communication. And I think in some ways, I like to think my vision, and I want you to be thinking about that too, is that this kind of thing, like any crisis, does bring people together. It certainly brings the entire planet together. We're all experiencing it at the same time. So with this rebirth stage, we start out in overwhelm. Now what do I do? And then at some point, Goddess knows when this will happen. At some point, we move to this, okay, I am committed to making this change and doing this. And it's not an easy process. Can you see how some of those, and I'll just kind of plug this in there, can you see how some of those stages of grief that I talked about at the beginning get woven in there? I mean, we're talking about anger, denial, all that stuff that happened in the beginning, depression, all the ways that we resisted, that we grieved, we've been grieving, we continue to grieve with all the things that are changing. And then slowly, we're kind of testing things out. We're coming to the place of acceptance in the grief process as well. And then remember the next stage that was coming up is meaning. How do we find meaning in this new world, in our lives, and globally as a global community? So that kind of brings you through just a brief look at the stages. I do think too that the divine feminine, and I talk about this all the time. In fact, tomorrow night is the little, throw it in here because I'll probably forget if I don't. Our Ignite Your Goddess Wisdom evening intensive is tomorrow night that I'm doing with Barbara Bijou. So just look at the events section on this Facebook page, on my Spirited Living with Deborah Roth page. The rise of the divine feminine has been happening for a while. I think times like this, all of those qualities of compassion and honoring our emotions, honoring our intuition, honoring the earth, that's so huge right now, honoring our bodies, all of those things become part of this rebirth as well. So, having moved through all of that with you, kind of given you the context, I would invite you all to make yourselves comfortable. Close your eyes. If you've got some paper and pencil, and if not, that's okay. You can just kind of hold it within. Hold your thoughts and your ideas and your answers to some of the questions that I'm going to ask you as you go into your own initiation place. So let's just settle in briefly. And I may move through this somewhat quickly, but keep in mind that you can always listen to it again and pause the video if you want to take longer to experience some of these 3 stages of transition, what you're going through now. So settle in, please. And let's take 3 deep breaths together so we can entrain ourselves with each other. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling a 3rd time together and exhaling. Continuing to breathe deeply into this place of transformation that's within, this non-linear process, this place of discomfort that we find ourselves. And in your mind's eye, in the magic of your imagination, find yourself in a favorite wood or forest, or again, just one that seems beautiful for you, at the bottom of a not too high mountain. But you are your own shaman in this case. You will be climbing the mountain, walking up. Imagine yourself making your way through the trees, around the rocks, climbing higher. You know that on this mountain is your initiation cave, where you will move into, where you will climb into. Envision that in your mind's eye. Envision yourself moving towards it as you perhaps come above the tree line. Bring yourself higher, maybe climbing over some rocks to bring yourself ever higher toward your initiation cave. As you climb over this last, little rock, big rock, you see it before you. Make your way towards the cave, really reflecting now on what is it that you are leaving behind. Before I pause at the entrance to the cave, what are you glad to leave behind in your life, in the way that the world has operated, in the way that humanity has treated the earth? What is it that you're perfectly happy to be leaving behind in this first release stage of this global initiation and of your personal initiation? Pausing for one more moment, acknowledging, and this is where some grief may come in, acknowledging, what will I miss? What are the things that I'm not so happy about leaving behind? Just hold that for a moment. If you want to jot any of these down, these 2 questions that are part of this first stage of endings of release. What are you glad to be leaving behind? What will you miss? What will humanity miss? And then Now stepping forward and stepping into this powerful, deep cave where true transformation can happen in this retreat stage of your transition. Imagine all of humanity in their own caves. With the power of our imagination, the magic of our imagination, we can envision millions of people right now in their own initiation caves, really retreating into a space of deep transformation, of deep self-reflection, stillness. And as you sit in this cave, feel yourself held by the darkness, held by the Earth Mother in her womb. In this cave, as you explore both your inner world and reflect on what the outer world will look like on the other side, in this time of retreat, of stillness, what remains constant? What do you carry with you from the pre-pandemic time? What does humanity carry with them? Everyone in all their caves around the world. What continues? What remains constant? Your families, your health, hopefully. What are the things that you can draw strength from in this time of retreat? What can you do now in this place of retreat that you couldn't do before? What are you doing now? Maybe it's learning new skills. Maybe it's doing Facebook Live for the first time. Maybe it's spending time, more time, even though it may not be personal, physical time with friends and family. What are some of the things and the people and the projects? What are the things that you're doing now that you weren't doing, that maybe you couldn't even do before? Take a moment to reflect on those. And then reflect on what you can do to most take care of yourself on every level, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, so that as you begin to prepare to come out of your initiation cave, to come back out into the world, to move out from this chrysalis of transformation. What do you need to do? What do you need to continue to do to feed your mind, to soothe your heart, to spark your spirit, to nurture your body? Make the commitment to hold on to those too. Things that you had the time maybe to do for the first time. Meditate more, do yoga more often. What are some of those things that you want to hold on to as you begin to move out from your cave, as humanity is reborn as well? And now, feel a stirring within you. Allow yourself to stand up from this cozy womb cave that you have been retreating in, that you've really experienced these shifts and changes in the midst of this transformation. Imagine the world. Imagine human beings everywhere. beginning to emerge from their caves, from their time of contemplation, of retreat, of reflection. And as you get up and just kind of stretch, feel yourself being reborn. Feel yourself in a new skin. And as you begin to walk out, back out into the light of day, on the ledge where your cave is, what are you most grateful for from this time of contemplation, of retreat? What people, what skills, what are you most grateful for? And then the other question for this rebirth time: who do I need to be to move forward, to move back into the world more powerfully than ever? As you feel the sun on your face coming out of that dark cave, that womb in Mother Earth, feel yourself moving forward, moving out, reflecting on what you want to do differently. What are the things that you're committed to creating in your life? What are the must-haves, as I call them? What are the things you're willing to negotiate about? What are the things you know you absolutely don't want to go back to? And then, if not now, then when you have a chance, can you think globally? What are the things that humanity must commit to moving forward now in order to survive? This planet will survive. What can we do to support her? And then what are the things that, we can be a little flexible about, culture to culture? And then what are the things we know we definitely don't want to go back to? Allow yourself to reflect on those a little bit more when you have a chance. But now, as this new butterfly, emerge from your initiation cave, begin to make your way back down the mountain, feeling refreshed, reborn, feeling lightness in your step, feeling committed as you move into this new world to creating possibilities and opportunities that you could never have imagined before. So in your mind's eye, bring yourself all the way down to the bottom of this mountain, knowing that you can revisit your cave when you feel the need for contemplation. Remember, this is not a linear process. We can go back from rebirth and sit and retreat a little bit more. Think about even further back. What is it? What more do we have to release? What more do we have to shed, let go of, surrender? It is a spiral. This movement of transformation, these stages of transition. So as you emerge from this global and personal rite of passage, let's take 3 breaths together. Inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling and exhaling. And inhaling together a 3rd time. Entrained as we are in our breath, and exhaling, opening your eyes and returning to our space, our virtual space. Welcome back. I would absolutely love to hear what people are, anything that's come up for people. However, if you don't want to write now, that's just fine. I hope you'll grab me on Facebook or personal PM me or email I'm thinking about doing, I have a transition program that I've done for groups a couple times. That might be something to play with. Hadn't thought about it until now. So thank you all so much for coming. This is really, I've loved being here with you. It's kind of, it is an interesting place. You can see me. I can't see much of you, but I'll be able to look at who was here afterwards, and I so appreciate it. Thank you, Michelle, Shauna, everyone else that was here. I thought I saw Avianca at some point. So, move gently, be very sweet and loving with yourself as we